From the Daily Caller, Jen Kearns. Media uses President Bush's death to throw shade at Trump. I'm going to start by saying, I kind of said this in the last video I made, never been a big fan of Bush, of any of them. Granted, I was like I don't know how old I was. How old was I? 2 years old when Bush became president, so I don't really know a whole lot about him. What I do know is a lot about his son. Never been a big fan, but for the most part, maybe it's because I'm a lot younger than a lot of people that I'm just kind of like more ambivalent about the politics of George H.W. Bush. I can talk all day and night about the politics of George W. Bush. And I kind of will project from W to HW, so that may be a little bit unfair, but that's besides the point. The point is, it is sad when people die, no matter what. No matter what. Maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm wrong. When John McCain died, people said, Tim, you're wrong to try and honor, in a sense, the legacy of McCain because he was a bad person. That's fine. I don't believe in the death penalty. I believe the death penalty is wrong because I value life. Plain and simple. And it's complicated, especially when you get into the pro-choice, pro-life debate, because I'll just leave it there. I don't want to make this video about that, but it is really, really complicated. Ultimately, it worries me that there are people who celebrate death in any form. It's sad. Death should be something, it's like, okay, when it comes to war, that's sad. It's sad that people are pitted against each other. When it comes to our targets, the people we drone strike, high-profile targets, people who are in terror cells, that's still sad that these people do these things. It's sad to me that people have to die, right? Or that we believe they do, and sometimes, yes. Look, I'm against the death penalty, but I recognize sometimes there are really bad people that must be stopped, and it's really challenging. Batman, you're wrong. And there's a story arc about this in Batman, that he refused to kill the Joker, and then eventually the Joker kills one of the Robins. And that's when you realize sometimes there are really bad people. Now, in the instance of George H.W. Bush, he died of old age. And I think using his death to throw shade at Trump is absolutely absurd, and it's wrong. And it's, listen, you want to criticize the Bushes? Go for it. You want to criticize H.W. Bush, now that everyone's talking about him because he passed? Go for it. You want to use the death of somebody to insult somebody else? Now you double crossed the line, in my opinion, because I think throwing shade at people who are dead is inappropriate. And I know it's funny, because people always say, there's always like a person, they criticize, they'll insult, and then as soon as a person dies, everyone at the funeral says they were the greatest person in the world, right? There's a reason we do that. Does it mean they're actually the greatest person in the world? No. It means we recognize that there's an inherent value to life, and we want to be positive people and celebrate the good things about people. Someone could be 80% bad, but do 20% good things. We focus on the good things. Get rid of the bad ideas, keep the good ideas. Plain and simple. Yes, maybe that whitewashes some bad actors after their lives, and that's true. It does. And look, it's nuanced, because as I mentioned, there are some people who probably do deserve to die. Seriously. There are people who are like extremist terrorists who are violent and evil people. And I don't use the word evil lightly due to the philosophical ramifications of the concept of duality, but I don't want to get into that. Let's just read the story. Even in death, the mainstream media just can't contain themselves. In promoting a story about the passing of former President H.W. Bush, the Associated Press highlighted Bush's loss to Democrat Bill Clinton in 1992, while omitting Bush's World War II service. By day's end, the AP succumbed to public outrage, deleted the tweet, and issued an apology. However, the media's biased reporting didn't end there, it's only the beginning. And I want to point out by saying the AP omitting World War II service isn't the worst thing in the world. And I would never take that to believe the AP was trying to be disrespectful. Just that they see value, like they prioritize something else. Now, let's talk about where things get bad. Since then, the mainstream media has used the occasion of the elder Bush's death to slam Trump. In a snarky piece titled, George H.W. Bush was everything Trump isn't, the LA Times reported that the traits that defined Bush's one term in office are scandalously absent from the way Donald Trump has approached the highest office in the land. In remembering Bush, CNN's Chris Cuomo threw shade at the current president by mentioning bombast and locker room talk. The Late Show host Colbert honored the late Bush also by cheaply slamming Trump. CNN also reported the elder Bush was a humble and gentlemanly statesman whose life and service was seen to stand in direct contrast to the vitriol and partisanship of the Trump era. Washington Post contributor Daniel Dresner took the occasion of Bush's death to suggest that Trump ought to lose his next election. In what seemed like a stretch, he tied Trump to the elder Bush by writing, hopefully. However, there is one way the Bush and Trump will be similar. They will both be one-term presidents. You would think that people would write articles talking about the good things they liked about George H.W. Bush. And I do believe it would be fair to write an article where you say, listen, we absolutely must recognize the shortcomings of the individual while praising the things they did right so that future generations can understand what was good and what was bad. Instead, they spend their time insulting Trump, someone who has literally nothing to do with H.W. Bush other than he's in the office the guy was in 20 plus years ago. Or 20 years ago. Yeah, literally. It leaves one wondering, are these eulogies or campaign mail pieces? Of course. For the New York Times, Peter Baker. Of course, the New York Times' Peter Baker wasted no time going for the jugular. For his part, Mr. Bush was never impressed by Mr. Trump, Baker wrote. I don't like him. He recounted Mr. Bush telling an author in May 2016. Bush had reportedly called Trump a blowhard, but oddly enough, Bush also admitted in the same breath, I don't know much about him. I think that's fair. Even historian Douglas Brinkley took the occasion of the elder Bush's death to take a swipe at Trump. Brinkley pointed out to People magazine that Bush found Trump, or at least his social media activity, to be gauche. Is that how you pronounce it? He even went so far as saying that the real reason Trump wasn't in attendance at former First Lady Barbara Bush's funeral was simple. She didn't want him there. Even the Washington Post's official obituary, Karen Tumulty, took a swipe at Trump by saying Bush's currency of personal connection was the handwritten letter, not the social media blast. Clearly a dig at Trump's active voice on Twitter. So why the snark? For the media, giving credit to a Republican is a zero-sum game. For the mainstream media, to compliment one Republican, they must tear down another. The same was true after Arizona Senator John McCain's passing. They couldn't simply laud McCain for his heroism and years of service. It would be far too dangerous to admit a Republican's goodness. They chose to make a mockery of the nearest rival Republican in the process. I like how they label it as a zero-sum game. Basically, Republicans get 4 brownie points. And with George H.W. Bush passing, we're going to give those brownie points to him and say great things about him. And that means we got to say bad things about Trump to keep the balance. It's always about keeping the balance. It is true that Bush was a loyal public servant, but so is Trump, who puts up with more than his fair share of attacks on himself, his children, and his spouse. And I think it's really obvious why. It's called the Trump bump, which I'm sure you've all heard of. Listen, they want to write about George H.W. Bush. But what kind of articles get traffic? Insulting Donald Trump. Why, in fact, the Daily Caller is actually linked to these stories. Essentially, inadvertently, driving traffic to the various articles that are playing this game. That's why they do it, because it works. We've known this. What is it? 93% of all stories about Trump are negative. But that isn't where it ends, because stories that aren't even about Trump are negative about Trump too. I think this is really a really fascinating phenomenon we can see. When people talk about how 93% of the stories written about Trump are negative, what they fail to add in there is that stories that aren't even about Trump, for some reason, are also negative about Trump. That would mean that realistically, the amount of negative press about the amount of stories about Trump that are negative toward him are actually above 100%, because there are more stories negative about Trump than there are stories about Trump. You see what I'm saying? Where were we? As for their childish behavior in the wake of the death of George H.W. Bush, the media are once again demonstrating that their news reporting belongs in the opinion section. That's fair too. Like, you want to write an obituary? Sure. You want to write an obituary where you slam someone unrelated to the president? Yeah, maybe you should write an op-ed comparing the two, and that's that. I mean, look, if they want to write some articles that are specifically about the two of them as presidents, sure, I get it. I still don't like the idea that you wait until someone's dead to then use the wave, the trend of people searching for the name to smear Trump. The media also missed the lesson, the heartfelt letter Bush left Clinton before leaving office, in which he honored the peaceful transfer of power to America. You will be our president when you read this note. I wish you well. I wish your family well. Your success now is our country's success. I am rooting hard for you. And that was actually a really big story that went around on conservative sources. Certainly it was viral on Twitter. Fox News picked it up. That even though George H.W. Bush lost after one term, he wrote this very gracious letter to Bill Clinton saying, I'm rooting for you. Your success is our success. Your success is our success. And it seems like, you know, I'll put it this way. When George W. Bush was running for office, everyone called him, you know, the worst name in the book. associating him with that very awful man from World War II's Germany, who, where I believe if I say his name, YouTube will probably demonetize my video, so I'm going to avoid saying it. But you know which guy I'm talking about. Now, Obama gets elected, and everyone stays quiet, even though Obama does a lot of the same things that Bush did, that Clinton did. Trump gets in office, and now all of a sudden we're back to the same old rhetoric once again, because it's what the media does. The media's goal is to generate traffic, and they want to be sensational, and this is the game they play. Instead of simply saying, hey, George H.W. Bush has passed, here's what we think, they want to take the opportunity to get that Trump bump. They want to say, hey, look, we talked about Trump. And thus, I'll end by saying this. There are more negative stories about Trump than there are stories about Trump. Technically, it's not true, but you get what I'm trying to say. These stories about H.W. Bush are not... Trump isn't supposed to be the subject matter. But they throw shade his way anyway. And I think it just shows how awful people can be. But, let me just say this. It doesn't excuse politicians from being awful either. I don't want to run defense for H.W. Bush. Obviously, nobody's perfect. And I'm not a big fan of most presidents, basically. But anyway, I'm done. I'm going to get out of here. I'll see you guys on the main channel tomorrow at 4 p.m. Thanks for hanging out.